heard a little bit from Sandy about Cesair's extraordinary journey. And I'd just like to point out that the earliest people in Ireland, even the ones that we found, we know there were people here before that, would have experienced the collapse, a huge tidal wave and floods. And it's very possible that this was in the stories, in the folk memory passed down. And the very first people that we have found in Ireland, probably from 8,000 years ago, but evidence that there were people here before that, in terms of, animal remains and human markings on them, would have had dark skin and light eyes. Every possibility that they came from, well, we all know we all come out of Africa. So although this is kind of peddled as a story that the monks conveniently made to provide a pseudo history because we didn't have a creation story, there's probably a lot of solid folk lore and folk myth in there, of people talking about the terrible times. So Cesair heard that Noah was not allowing her father on the ark, which was rather mean of him. But she just took it on the chin and spoke with her father and said, well, what do you want to do about it? And he said, well, I mean, if Noah's building a boat, then possibly we should build a boat too. She said, I agree with you. She said, I will work with you as long as you accept my leadership. Bits agreed wholeheartedly and suggested that they bring Fintan along. Fintan was known as a wild, kind of a dreamy, mysterious lad, but he was kind of handy as well. And he wasn't that hard on the eye. So Cesair didn't object on that score either. And she brought along Ladra, who was a well-known pilot. He was brilliant. He could steer through a storm. He could steer blindfold nearly. And so they set about building 3 ships, as it turned out. And Cesair carefully selected the strongest, smartest, most amazing women. And they set sail from Sudan. And as Sandy's already described, they went around most of the known world, and wherever they went, they didn't really, well, Cesair couldn't put up with their stories and their way of being and the architecture of their society. She knew there was something more. She wanted more. And in a way, she wanted something very simple and something very pure. And she had made an idol while she was building the ark. And the idol had told them in a very dusty way that they should go west and to go as far west as they possibly could. And there they would find an island that had known no people and had no monsters and had no serpents. And this was the place where she could start over. And that's what she did. She took a very long way around. Unfortunately, as they came out of Spain, in Spain, it was told she went up a very tall tower, and she spied in the distance something that was kind of half visionary, green, sparkling in the ocean, and decided that there was where she was going to go. But unfortunately, whenever they left the Bay of Biscay, a terrible storm blew up and 2 of her ships were lost. So they arrived in Ireland. It's said that she arrived on the 15th day of the moon at Dunanmark in Bantry Bay. And when she set foot on the island of Ireland, which was completely forested and very green and beautiful beyond measure, a lake burst forth to welcome her. So the land welcomed Cesair. They got off the boat, they disembarked, I guess is the word, and they split. They decided they'd have to split up, use their resources wisely. And so Ladra went with Bamba, and he stayed in that particular area. They went to where the 3 sisters' rivers were. Her father, Biff, he went with her sister, actually, well, a distant cousin, And he took his portion of women, and Cesair went with Fintan, who she'd got to know pretty well on the journey. And they went with the remaining women. So the women split up in 3 groups, one with each of the men. Now, the story is that Ladra, the pilot, was the first dead man of Ireland. Apparently, he died from an excess of women, or possibly from the wound he sustained in his buttocks from an oar during a storm. The monks left us wonder about that one. And so Ladra's women joined up with Bith's women, and with they were divided between Bith's group and Cesair and Fintan's group. Unfortunately, and at this stage, Bith was heading north. Unfortunately, Bith died of an excess of pleasure. It didn't mention anything about heart condition or anything like that, just an excess of pleasure. And therefore, all of the women reconvened with Cesair and Fintan and decided they'd have to make a go of it. There was only one man in Ireland now, and poor old Fintan, who had actually fallen hook, line, and sinker, completely in love with the gorgeous, mighty Cesair, just couldn't find it in his heart. It wasn't the delight that some people might have thought, to have 50 women looking at him in a particular way. And the story is that Fintan ran away. He disappeared and he went underground. And then the story is that Cesair, pretty much soon after, died of a broken heart. And she was buried at Bunsuna. She's buried at Slibaha. And the story then tells us that some of the women died of broken hearts as well, but not much more is said about what happened to them, all of them. But the flood did come, and all of Ireland was inundated. And only one woman survived the inundation, and that was Bamva. Bamva, who had brought herself to the highest point of Ireland. And we hear more about her in other stories later. Fintan, however, had sat in a cave at the edge of a river, mourning and deeply, deeply distressed. And he dreamed a dream one night that he became a salmon. And when he woke the next morning, he could already hear the sound of the water, and soon the waters rose. And there and then, Fintan shape-shifted into a salmon. And as a salmon, he lived, it said, for hundreds of years, and he knew every single river and stream of Ireland. And then he took to the air. He became a hawk and an eagle sometimes, and sometimes he was a stag with 7 tines. And the story goes that Fintan MacBocra survived for 5,000 and more years. And it was because of him and his magical ability that we know the story of Cesair and her 50 women, and her father, and the poor old pilot Ladra, and her companion Bamva. And that, my friends, is the story of Cesair